welcome to another episode of Roll or Die. This week's guest has been requested for many times to appear on this show. I had a little bit of trouble reaching him in the end. I had to meet him in person at the gathering the other week to arrange to make this happen. So I'm really looking forward to this. This is, we talk about being a podcast that talk to the OGs. This is probably one of the most OG people within Australia. I think he is the first black belt in Queensland. He started his jiu-jitsu journey back in 1980, before probably many of our listeners were even born. He's since retired from coaching, but he still trains a couple of times a week at Tweed, Puma, and D Labrador. I hope I got that right. Thanks very much for joining us, Vincent Perry.
Thank you. So in 1980, I didn't start jiu-jitsu. I started jiu-jitsu with John in 1992. So I started martial arts in 1980.
Oh, okay. Apologies. You started your martial arts in 1980. Apologies.
Yes.
So tell us then about that that experience, Vincent. Which martial arts did you start with, and how did you discover jiu-jitsu?
Okay, so I started with boxing in 1980, and I did that for about 12 months. And then I got into what was a non-classical kung fu, and I did that for about 18 months. And then I went down to Sydney and trained with a guy called Walt Missingham, and that was also a non-classical kung fu. And I did that for 9 or 10 years.
Was there a reason that you started martial arts, Vincent? Was it something that you kind of looked at from a childhood thing, or was there a reason that you got into martial arts?
Yeah, so I grew up out in the country, out in the bush in Queensland, out on a property, and there was nothing around out there. And when I turned 17, we went into Toowoomba, and martial arts was too expensive for me to do, so I just did boxing for the first 12 months, and then I got a job, and then I started training the martial arts. And of course, I'd been influenced by Bruce Lee.
And then tell us about the foray into jiu-jitsu in 92. How did that happen?
Okay, so I'd been trying to do a bit of ground fighting with the non-classical kung fu that we were working with Walt Missingham, and tried to do some wrestling, or did some wrestling, and I was doing some ground fighting with Larry Hartzell through the Inosanto Academy over in America. And a friend of mine, Anthony Lange, said he'd tried this jiu-jitsu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he invited me over to his place. So I went to Anthony's and we rolled around, and he submitted me a couple of times, and I thought, gee, I better get into this. So my introduction was through Anthony Lange, and he was only a beginner at that time.
Do you remember the submissions that he got you with?
I remember one of them was a Kimura, a figure four. Yeah. So.
And then what next? How did you then make the leap to training?
So then I rang John Will, and we arranged to go down there and train. And Anthony and I went down there for about 3 weeks. Anthony came down with me. I sold everything up I had in Sydney, jumped in my station wagon and went down to Geelong. And Anthony came with me for the first 3 weeks. We stayed in a caravan when I was there. And and I trained there for 3 or 4 months at John's. That was in 1993.
So, sorry, let me get this right. So you tried this jiu-jitsu with Anthony Lange, and then thought, I've got to learn this. You were based in Sydney at the time, and then just kind of put everything into your car, got in the car and drove down to Geelong to, whatever, 8 hours or whatever, lived in a car
12
on the basis of jiu-jitsu, on what you had done with Anthony Lange for just a time.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. I mean, we know people get obsessed with jiu-jitsu, and but that's extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I trained overseas. I'd gone over to America in 1991 and trained over at the Inosanto Academy. And one of my training mates in the class was Eric Paulson. So he's quite a good, jiu-jitsu player now, but also an MMA coach, an MMA fighter. And so, I was pretty obsessed with it. But, almost as a very highly skilled amateur. because there was no professional thing back in those days.
And then what does the journey look like just after that, Vincent? So you go down, you spend a few months down in Geelong, and then what happens? Do you go back and then do you take what you learnt in Geelong back to Queensland and start to teach it? Or are you sort of at this stage just keeping it for yourself and then just training with friends? Like, what happens after that?
So what happened, I was down in Geelong for 3 or 4 months. I came back to Queensland. I was living in Sydney, went down to Geelong, then moved back up to the Gold Coast. So my parents were living on the Gold Coast at the time. So I moved back up to the Gold Coast, and I went over to Thailand for a month, dropped my car off at the Gold Coast, went over to Thailand for a month. Then I came back to the Gold Coast and set up my academy, and I just started training people. So I had the non-classical kung fu that I had for 9 or 10 years, plus the stick fighting, all these different sorts of martial arts. And I just started incorporating the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu into it as well. I think John was calling it shoot fighting back in the day.
When was that, Vincent? How long ago? This
So
would
that
have
was
been
in
around the mid-90s, or
1993.
was this, when, do you remember when that was approximately?
1993 it was.
Wow. This
So
is
I moved back
even,
up
that's
to
the
the Gold
year the
Coast.
UFC, before the
Yeah, well,
UFC came out.
Yeah, before the UFC came out. I remember
So
reading.
doing UFC before UFC.
Sorry?
You're basically doing UFC, like you were doing mixed martial arts, right? Before mixed
Yeah.
martial arts was really a thing. Like if
Yeah,
you're
well,
doing all of
so-
these types of things, including stick fighting, and that's bringing it all together.
Yeah, that's right. So I trained with Dan Inosanto over in America. I don't know if you know Dan and his background, but he was Bruce Lee's training partner. And Eric Paulson is part of the Jeet Kune Do lineage as well. So Eric Paulson was shoot fighting or whatever over in America, in Japan around that time.
Right.
So
And what was the uptake like at that point, Vincent? Especially, in 1993, Brentos said MMA hadn't really taken off. How was it received did the students sort of flock to you, or was it sort of a bit of a slower uptake?
no, it was a very slow uptake. What was more of interest to the students was the kickboxing. So I'd kind of get them into the kickboxing and then bring them over towards the grappling. The UFC, the UFC started in 1993, but there
I
was
think that
only,
still happens now sometimes.
yeah, it still does. But MMA wasn't even a name till, I don't know, end of 90s or start of 2000.
No.
It was called cage fighting or no rules fighting.
And was there a professional path that you were looking at to fight for yourself? Like, was that something that you were sort of striving to do? Or were you more along you're a true martial artist where you're just trying to get better and then coach other people?
Yeah, that's the second thing. So I turned 30 in 1993. I was 31 in 1994, and I'd been fighting in my 20s, but back then, a 30-year-old fighting it wasn't necessarily a done thing. So you'd fight in your 20s, and there was no league around anywhere in Australia for the MMA fighting. So I just wanted to coach, and I was just doing it for myself and a few of my students.
Yeah. Were you getting people, for instance, like were you getting any law enforcement? Were you getting bouncers from clubs? Were you getting any of those sort of people coming through wanting to learn these skills that you had, Vincent?
No, not really. Not back in those days, because a lot of the bouncers were they were doing bodybuilding and some striking, some punching. They didn't really want to do grappling. They didn't want to go to the ground. So no, not really.
And did you find that then
And the police,
the UFC, when that took up in 93, I mean, a lot of our guests have told us how that, sorry, go on.
You're right.
Yeah, so a lot of our guests have told us that the UFC was the thing that really started them on their journey. Did you find that after the first couple of UFCs that took off in 93 onwards, was that when you found your students started to come, people joined more for the jiu-jitsu side of things, or they were still, it was not till a bit later?
Yeah, no, not at all. The UFC wasn't really that big in Australia. You'd only find out about it in the magazines or get a video of it. You get a video of it. So, no, it wasn't that big at all. And it wasn't till The Ultimate Fighter came out in 2004. That's when it started to build. That's when MMA really started to take off.
So in that time,
10 years, Yeah, in that 10 years, what does the jiu-jitsu that you're doing, what does that look like? Is that still more like a shoot fighting sort of, strike, 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 takedown, and then submissions? Is that kind of what it's looking like and what you're teaching?
No, so in my class, it was like I'd teach kickboxing classes and grappling classes, and they were kind of separate. So for the first 8 or 9 years, it was kind of separate. Although we'd do some takedowns and things like that. It was more just the striking, the stand-up striking, and grappling. And back then, I'd wear the gi a lot
And what about
when I did the
your
jiu-jitsu.
learning, Vincent? Were you and what about your learning, Vincent? Were you going back down to Geelong to meet with John Will on a regular basis to keep updating your knowledge, or where were you getting your jiu-jitsu from?
Yep. So I'd go back down to Geelong and train with John Will, and then there was as would happen, there was a guy called John Simons, who was John Will's first black belt, and he was doing university at Lismore. And so he'd come up to the Gold Coast maybe once a month and train. And he was probably a blue belt back then, and then purple belt. And he'd come up and we'd train once a month for one weekend of a month up at my place. And also I'd get a lot of seminars from people coming out from overseas. And Eric Paulson came over and trained a couple of times back in the 90s at my gym as well. So that was more for the MMA than the BJJ.
And then, so going through your belt system with those sort of people coming through. So what did that look like? So, you started off where you were in a white belt when you were teaching. When did you get your blue belt? Sort of give us that sort of process and the progression going forward from there.
Yeah. Yep. No worries. So I got my blue belt back in about 1995, and maybe 96. I can't remember which date. And then I got my purple belt about 6 years later. So it was around 2002 or 2003. And then the brown belt, then the black belt. I got my black belt in 2007. And so the students weren't really interested in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu per se. So, I didn't get my first blue belt, didn't give out my first blue belt till 2002 or whatever it was.
And tell us about that day that you got your black belt.
Yes, so that was 2007. It was at the Gathering, and I'd taken a big team down to the Gathering, or whatever it was called back in those days. And Hegan was there and John was there, and unbeknownst to myself, I received my black belt. So it was 18 years ago or something.
Do you know how many black belts you've given out, Vincent? Do you remember?
No, I don't know. I could look it up somewhere. I've probably given out maybe 16, 17 black belts in those in the years since.
I like that. Like, that's a cool thing to see, how your jiu-jitsu has then progressed down through other people, like I find that always of interest for me, like we've had like VC who's on, and he's given out, I think he said 48 or 47 or 48 black belts. And, some people, I don't know how many John has given out, but he would have given out quite a few. And I think that lineage is always really interesting for, not just for me, but for a lot of the other guys who listen as well. It's always interesting.
Yep. Did you say VC, Vincent?
Yeah, Vincent Cavalcante, yeah.
From up on the Gold Coast?
Yep.
Oh, Vicente came to my class when he first came over from Brazil, pretty quickly after he came over from Brazil. So he was in my class 2008, 9 or 10 or whatever it was that he got over here. He's got a great club running.
Wow.
Yeah.
He does. He's such a nice guy. Yeah, very much.
Beautiful guy.
And Vincent, have you seen, tell us a little bit about that as well, the Brazilians coming over. So you would have also seen the uptake of the Brazilians coming to Australia to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, particularly on the Gold Coast. There's quite a lot of Brazilians there. That was sort of in the early 2000s, would you say?
It's early 2000s, there was Daniel Lima and another guy, Trevin. But other than that, there wasn't a lot of Brazilians. There wasn't a lot here on the Gold Coast. Towards the end of 2000, so 2009, 2010, more and more Brazilians started coming out. And I had a Brazilian black belt coaching in my classes in 2010, 2011.
And then what was that level like? So by that stage, you've been a black belt for a few years, and then the Brazilians coming out. Like, was there a discrepancy, do you think, between, an Australian black belt and a Brazilian black belt, or were they on par? Like, how did you kind of see that?
It depended on the school that they were at, but yeah, they were pretty good. The black belts were pretty good that were coming out. And I see the levels changing every 3 or 4 years. Like, what was a purple belt a couple of years ago would be a blue belt now. I mean, it's just got everything's gone up in MMA
Yeah.
and in BJJ.
What other sort of changes, Vincent, do you think of the main ones that you've seen in the 20 plus years that you've been doing it?
With the BJJ. Yep, with the BJJ. So there's a lot more no-gi now. So yeah. Well, there's two. There's two-sided strands. There's the gi and the no-gi, and they've gone off in different directions in a way. So the no-gi's of a much higher level now than it was 5-10 years ago.
Which is your preference? Where do you prefer? Where do you see the future?
Well, I enjoyed learning the gi when I first started the BJJ. You had to do the gi. There was no doubt about it. You had to do the gi, and so for many, many years I wore the gi, and I still like wearing the gi. But the no gi is where if there was no gi when I started jiu-jitsu in 1992, I would have just stayed with that.
That's quite interesting. When do you think, Vincent, like no gi became really popular? Like, was it mainly through like the ADCC, like early ADCC? Was that kind of when no gi became really popular and everyone started to do it?
No, people started doing it then in ADCC, but I think it's really, I mean, just even the Russians with the MMA, there's a whole lot of bunch of people. So as Higan Machado was saying at John Will's Corral belt grading the other day, he said he went over to so Eric Paulson trains with Higan Machado, and he said he went over to Eric's class a couple of months ago, and the Rotolo brothers are training at Eric's class now with Eric, and he said it really looks like catch-can wrestling. The BJJ no-gi stuff looks like catch-can wrestling. So it's just been in the last couple of years that it's gotten really popular.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
and Vincent, outside of jiu-jitsu,
yep.
Sorry, go on.
No, you're right.
I understand you're a bit of a muso. You put out an album about 10 years ago or so, and I've been told that you used to bring the guitar out and sing it at open mats and things like that. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. Yep. It's all part of creativity.
Someone may have even sent me one of your songs on the link to your profile on Spotify. So if anybody wants to have a listen to Vincent, well, actually, I was told to ask you to belt out a song for us on here if you're up to it.
With the delay, it'd be terrible. It'd be awful with the delay.
Mate, that's the reason.
We'll have to put the link on this
Vincent,
episode.
Yeah, you just said, Vincent, that the creativity is similar to jiu-jitsu. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, to me, it's creativity associated with all the martial arts. It's just about expressing yourself. And, in jiu-jitsu, you use your body, your feet, your arms, your chin, your head, just to create an outcome. And the same thing with music. You're using your hands and your guitar and singing, creating outcomes.
How did you find the learning with playing music? We've had obviously a lot of jiu-jitsu guys come on here, and it's surprising how many actually play music as well. Do you find the actual learning of, like, let's say learning jiu-jitsu and learning guitar, like, is the learning theory the same? Do you find the learning theory between playing guitar and jiu-jitsu the same?
It is and it isn't. I notice in the BJJ world these days, there's quite a few guys that you could say are on the autism spectrum, that are a little bit autistic. And to play a musical instrument really well, you've got to be a little bit autistic. You've got to have this ability just to sit there with your guitar or your piano and just play and practice and practice and practice.
And going back to jiu-jitsu, Vincent, so the way that you learnt your jiu-jitsu, where you would go down to John Will and learn from him, or from John Simon when he would come up once a month or so. So you would sort of almost have to cram for like a weekend as much as you could into it, and then go away. And then how did you practice those things? Because you had students, yes, but they would have all been at a lesser level to you. So you were quite a pioneer in a sense, but how did you find your learning was able to progress in that environment?
So what it was I had my students and I'd practice on my students. So I'd get myself in a poor position, say under mount, and I'd practice getting out from under mount, or I'd get myself under side control and practice getting out from under side control. And then just we do a lot of hold training.
With those skills that you were developing by doing in the hold training, were you working on techniques that you had been shown, or were you sort of using things that you were sort of figuring out on the throughout those times as well? Or were you just combining them?
Yeah, both. Yeah, I'd work stuff out, and I'd learn I'd practice what I'd learnt down in Geelong or with John Simons, and then I'd just practice, and then I'd create some stuff too, just work stuff out, and sometimes it'd be wrong.
Is there anything that you kind of see and go, hey, I reckon I created that? And then you kind of look at it and go, oh, actually, that looks like it's been around for quite a while. Have you looked at those sorts of things?
Yeah, I see that sort of stuff. Not so much now, but back in the earlier days, I'd see stuff and I go, well, I thought I created that. And obviously it'd been around for a few years somewhere.
Yeah.
But
it's like the Kimura. That's pretty interesting. I wonder if I turn the arm the other way, if I can still do that. Yeah, I like that. We'll call it the Australian.
Yeah. As your questions are kind of alluding to, back in those days, we didn't have anything like YouTube. Now there's YouTube and people can get it like in an instant.
And on that, Vincent, do you think, what are your thoughts around? Do you think that's a good thing, or do you think it's maybe better the way that you had to do it and you had to sort of really work it out for yourself almost? So what are your thoughts around that today? Do you think people have it too easy, that they can just click on a YouTube video and do it, or do you think that's better?
So my thinking is that YouTube is absolutely phenomenal. So there's so many brilliant jiu-jitsu players around now that are only 15 or 16 years of age. Yet they can go and look, they can see a world title fight that happened today somewhere in the world, and they can check out the technique that they're using in that title match, and they can practice it and practice and practice it. And they're just becoming phenomenal there. And it's the same with music as well. There's so many phenomenal guitarists these days. When I started playing guitar, you'd have to come and see somebody busking, and you'd try look at them, and then you'd go home and try practice it. Home for me was way out in the countries.
It is interesting, the progression of, you kind of mentioned it before a little bit actually, Vincent, that, what a purple belt is today, maybe like a black belt 10 years ago, or, vice versa, those sorts of things. And I think the skill set that we're seeing in the jiu-jitsu world from some of these young kids, like whether they're 15, 16 or the Ruotolo brothers, for instance, these people who have been training now for, some of these kids have been training for 15 years, right? So the skill acquisition is starting to happen a lot faster. And I think there's probably less crap out there, so you don't have to filter through all the crap to get the good stuff. And now there is so much good stuff, right? And then that's just advancing the skill level of jiu-jitsu. Is that kind of what you're seeing?
Absolutely. Yep, definitely. The skills that these 15, 16, who's the next Rotolo brothers? They're 21 or 22 or 23 or however old they are. I'd like to know who the next ones are, the 15, 16-year-olds that are getting around the circuit that we're not knowing of yet, but we'll know of them in 4 or 5 years' time.
We're seeing that in the female jiu-jitsu world, like with Helena Craver and, like the talent that she has, and obviously the hard work and all the stuff she puts in. Sarah Galval's the same, and 12 months ago we were like, Adele is the king of the world, like she's the best grappler in the world. And then 12 months later, we're looking at these other ladies coming through who are 18, 19 years old. And you're like, oh my God. And as you say, like, well, who's just below these people, because they're out there, you know.
And they're getting
Yep.
younger and younger.
Yep. And you know what's that saying? You have to see it to be it. So you see somebody that they have as their, like some young kid coming through now has the Rotolo brothers as their main inspiration. So yeah, it's, you know, I remember when Marcelo Garcia was the king of the world.
Yeah, you see that in the sport world. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like we see it in all sports, you know, like the tennis world was famous. If, you know, like a 24-year-old female tennis player, like, oh, well, she's too old now, you know, like there's another 16, 17, 18-year-old female tennis player coming through, you know, like these younger athletes who just get, you know, bigger and faster and stronger. And then so much, they get so technical so much quicker too, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's happening in every sport, and it's definitely happening in the jiu-jitsu world for us, for sure. I can see why you've retired from, you know, like that hard stuff, mate.
Yeah, I still train twice a week, 2 nights a week. But yeah, it's a crazy world. The MMA world is getting so, you know, every 3 or 4 years there's a new champion that's coming through. You know, it's hard to imagine a champion being, you know, at the top of the game for 12 years or 13 years or whatever.
Vincent, what does jiu-jitsu look like for you now? So you're training just twice a week, and tell us about that. Are you doing other things outside of jiu-jitsu to help keep you on the mats? So what do those things look like? Are you stretching, weight training? What else do you do to
weight
keep
training,
you able to keep training?
So yeah, I also train once a week, just at my garage with some people to just some grappling. And you know, if I get grappling 3 times a week, that's enough for me. I don't have to do it 6 days a week anymore.
And how's the body holding up, mate? After 30 plus years of, you know, jiu-jitsu, and then obviously 40 plus years of different martial arts, how's the body holding up, mate?
It's not so good. I've got injuries. I've got little niggles here and there, and I'll wake up one morning, it'll be my shoulder, and I'll wake up the next morning, it'll be my foot. And just walking can be hard sometimes. And old injuries come back to bite you as well.
I know that feeling.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's not good. I don't want to hear that. Whenever I have a guest, especially one of your lineage, Vincent, I try and dig up a bit of dirt, and I have found out that back in the day, and some of our younger listeners may not know of this time, before we had IDs come up on phones, I understand you were a bit of a prank caller, and you liked to prank on some of your friends with different accents. Can you throw us an accent or two
I'd go
for our listeners?
Yeah. So I'd ring up and I'd go, hello. And it'd be Anthony Lang, and he'd go, yes, hello, I'm ringing up to find out about your martial art. And then I'd just, she's gone.
No, she's there. We're good. Mate, it's classic.
Yeah. So I do that.
Those days were good, right? Where you could get away with doing all those sorts of things.
Yeah, 100%. Back before smartphones, and yeah, definitely.
And then so your training, like I think you said Monday and Tuesday nights. How does your jiu-jitsu training look now? Are you doing some positional stuff? Is there still, you know, are you still acquiring new learning? Because obviously, you know, there's lots of different positions and those sorts of things now. So is that still sort of happening for you? Or are you just kind of going along, having fun, moving the body around a bit?
No. So it's still very much me researching. So I'll spend a bit of time each week looking at different, it's mostly jiu-jitsu for MMA. So different UFC fights or whatever, and just see the jiu-jitsu that they're using. And also, one big thing that's happened in jiu-jitsu and at CGI and things like that is the number of throws that people are doing, the different sorts of throws. So judo is a big part of the jiu-jitsu world as well, you know, from stand up to the ground. I'm seeing a lot more of that in the jiu-jitsu matches.
Yeah. Is that so is judo something you're kind of have you always looked at judo? Was that like new learning for you?
So it's new. Well, I have done a little bit of judo, but it's new learning in the sense of judo for the reality of judo, for MMA, the expression of judo in MMA, which really goes back to the catch.
One of our training partners and coaches, a guy called Kieran.
Yep.
Yeah. So Kieran or K-Dog, he talks about judo. He's a black belt in judo, but he also does judo for jiu-jitsu specifically. And he's like, this throw in judo you don't want to do because it's you have this this could be the outcome and you don't want that.
Yep.
So I think that's also one of the things that we see a little bit is we do start to see people coming through with judo skills and then putting their jiu-jitsu spin onto it,
Yep.
and that makes it really tough when you're an older guy and getting thrown too. So those are all things to be aware of.
Absolutely. So a little story. So back in 1996, I had this old guy. I thought he was old at the time. He was probably 50.
He's gone?
But he turned up to.
Unfortunately, we had a bit of a technical issue with Vincent's recording. It dropped out. We were unable to have him on the line to finish off this episode. So we are just doing this as a separate and going to be snipped together. Hope that you guys enjoyed one of the probably most OGs within the Australian Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu scene. He was awesome. May have to arrange to get him back on for a second time so we can expand a little bit more on some of those stories and some of those journeys that he shared. Did you want to do the wrap-up, Brentos? Unfortunately, we didn't get to ask him the pop quiz because he dropped out.
And see how you go with it, mate.
No one wants to hear
that was awesome, actually. Vincent was really cool, and so many stories, right? Like starting martial arts in 1980, and then like jiu-jitsu in 92. Like it's forever ago, isn't it?
That's right. That's it. Yeah.
Really cool. And
Queensland.
seeing the scene change over all those years, So, awesome podcast. Really enjoyed it. But that's it, guys. We will see you on the next episode of Roll or Die. Please like, rate, and share. Create a Funkst account and then like, rate, and share under that account too. Like you're allowed to do it. Nobody will stop you. That's it. Check it out. Share this far and wide. Kim, thanks for grabbing Vincent too. He was a great guest. Awesome that you guys could
Man
sort
to
of
nail
catch up in
down. I
person.
don't think he has much social media, but any of our listeners, if you do have suggested guests, send us a message. Probably Instagram's Roll or Die is the best place to do it, or to Brent or myself directly. We're always open to suggestions of people, OGs, or new up-and-comers, anybody that you can think of that you think would make a good guest. We're always open to, so please let us know. And like Brent said, we will see you on the next episode of Roll or Die.
See you next time.